My name is Tracy Jan. I'm an editor at the Washington Post, and I am here because I would like to have a conversation with British Robinson. British is president and CEO of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Last year, British was also named one of Forbes 50 over 50 for impact, a list of social entrepreneurs and change makers helping to make the world a better, more equitable place. I'm going to lift this up so I don't hunch over. Okay. Are you comfortable? No. We want you to be comfortable.
Okay, thanks.
Don't want to make you feel imprisoned. So we're here to talk about the literacy gap. About 130 million Americans are shut out of employment and economic advancement because they can't read or write with proficiency. I think that's about half of US adults, which was a statistic that surprised me. British, can you please give us an overview of how big the problem is and whether it's getting better or worse?
Great, thanks. So good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. The last panel, I'm gonna diverge just for a hot second. The last panel was very sort of Chicago, Illinois focused. So let me just take 2 seconds to ground us in the reality right here in Chicago. Currently in Chicago, you have what we call a low literacy rate of anywhere between 20 and 50%, specifically closer to 50% in Cook County. And that is really a harbinger of really what's going on across these United States. So about 2 years ago, we did the first ever macroeconomic study to inextricably link or to tie or to better understand the connection between low literacy and the economy and our health and wellness and economic mobility and social mobility. So many of the things the previous panel talked about, we believe literacy is inextricably linked to. So to kind of come back up and widen the lens a little bit, today, unfortunately, there are about 130 million Americans in the United States that essentially read below a 6th grade level. It's about 54% of our population, or 1 in 5, those ages 16 to 74. It affects everyone. Black, white, Latino, Hispanic, everyone. It is a national problem. There's no particular geography. It's obviously a bit more exacerbated in the South and the Southeast, and also in our major cities, but also in rural areas. So it's a national problem. You cannot compete with China or Russia or say that you want your city to grow and you want to be prosperous if you have a low literate population, anywhere between 10 to 50%. And when we speak about low literate, we really mean that kind of equivalency of reading below a 6th grade level. We also have about 43 million people in this country that essentially read below a 3rd grade level. 70% of people that are incarcerated in the United States essentially read below a 3rd grade level. So it's an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's a health issue. If you struggle with reading and you're low literate, these are adults we're talking about. This is a multi-generational problem. It's an intergenerational problem. I like to say if mama can't read, baby can't read. We know from an NIH study in the early 2000s that a mother's academic attainment is the single greatest factor in her child's future success in life. Now, families have changed a little bit, so we like to say head of household or caregiver or grandma or auntie. So it's a massive initiative that we need to, a massive problem, but also an opportunity that we need to tackle as a country.
So what is the larger impact of having so many illiterate, basically functionally illiterate Americans, especially on our economy?
So the impact on our economy is significant. So we just kind of coming through COVID, still have COVID. Let's just take health outcomes. So about 70% of people who are low literate in the United States have poor health outcomes. They use emergency rooms more often, and they typically die of preventative diseases simply because they can't read or understand medical protocols or adhere to drugs. For example, about 70 million people couldn't understand basic protocols around COVID. And that just meant not the complicated get your vaccine and all that. It simply meant wear a mask and wash your hands. The Journal of American Medical Association just did the first study, which is ongoing, that has told us anywhere between 10 to 20%. We lost 1 million Americans in COVID. 1 million of our brothers and sisters died of COVID Between 10 and 20% they believe died because they were low literate. So it has serious implications on the health side. What does it also mean practically? It means that you struggle to fill out a job application. It means you can't fill out your SNAP or your WIC application. It means that you probably can't read a medicine bottle. It is also, we're about to have an election. It is inextricably linked to being able to vote. You probably cannot, you're not voting because you can't read a ballot. We also know if you live in a community that has higher literacy rates, you're more likely to vote. So this is it has a serious implications for misinformation, disinformation, but also really challenging folks, millions of Americans, that they can't even exercise their right to vote.
Right. Disenfranchisement, disinformation. You're speaking to a health and science editor, so I love the implications to what we just have gone through and what we're still going through for many people. Our country has grown so divisive that even books have become politicized, with growing pushback against efforts by schools to address the long whitewashing of U.S. history. How do you think that efforts to ban books in schools will impact a child's joy or love for reading?
So I'll answer it a little differently. We don't really engage around the book ban issue, but our deep and long-standing partner who's here in Chicago, the American Libraries Association, Tracy Hall was just named Time 100 Women of the Year, and so Tracy is leading that charge, and we are blessed and grateful for Tracy to be a part of our national effort, which I'll talk about in a minute, where we see some solutions. But let me take a different angle on answering the question. Every child should be able to see themselves in the books that they read. It is empowering, it is engaging, but also if we're going to break the cycle of low literacy, every child needs to see a book that represents them. And we know when we do that, we are successful of that child, by the time they're in 4th grade, actually being on grade level reading, so we can break the cycle of low literacy. So that's what we're concerned about, making sure that books represent our society as a whole. And we're bullish on getting those out. And if you go to our website, they're free for parents and for kids, and it's every color in the rainbow, and every kid that lives in this country is represented.
Every family representation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm heartened. I have a 10-year-old son, so it's nice to see much more representation that's out there, if not in schools, at least in libraries, than there were when I was a kid.
100%.
So really important work. So can you talk a little bit about pockets of hope and where in this country you're seeing some potential solutions for increasing literacy rates?
Yeah, so let me take a minute to back into that question. So I mentioned we did the first ever economic study that we know of. There's probably a study that was done in the 70s or 80s, but not for a very long time. So we know that if you raise everyone in the United States up to just a 6th grade level, not a GED, not an AA, not a BA, not a master's, just to 6th grade level, this study that we commissioned with Gallup and the principal economist, Dr. Jonathan Rothwell, told us that we could gain $2.2 trillion in GDP, or about 10% of our GDP. That is conservative. We actually think the article was peer-reviewed by other economists. It's probably double that. And so why is that 2.2 trillion important, or that 10% of GDP? Because it's about equity, it's about dignity. It's not just about the GDP. It's actually about an individual person and their family sustaining wages and their incomes. So I'm going to break that down, because this whole endeavor is about economic mobility. If you are at a 6th grade level, you essentially make about $65,000 a year. And for a family of 4 in the United States, that's considered a family sustaining wage. If you're essentially between a 3rd and a 5th grade level, you make about $48,000 a year. If you're 3rd grade and below, essentially, you make $34,000 a year. I think most people in this room know that $34,000 a year is at the poverty line. So it is not just dollars and cents, but it's about being able to have family-sustaining wages so that you can live your life with dignity, or we like to say, so you can be a full parent, worker, and citizen. So those dollars and cents, that economic study mattered. And the reason why, we didn't do it to be cold or to leave the human piece out of it. In fact, it was for the exact opposite reason. This field is underfunded and under-researched. And when I say field, I mean the field of literacy, not the field of education. Literacy is actually considered the stepchild of education. I'm not talking about K-12. Of course, we're talking about K-12 because it's related to the child in the household, and then the parent being able to have a good job and a family-sustaining wage to take care of that child. The child does not live in poverty on their own. They live in poverty because their parent lives in poverty. That's why the study was so important. The study was so important so that we as a country can recognize that their individuals, our brothers and sisters, are living in poverty. Everybody's saying, hey, the gig economy is so great. Well, what we found is that if we go through this downturn or this recession gets any worse than it already is, those people that have 3 jobs are typically making about $100,000 to $110,000 a year, so they're getting by. Life is good. Well, as soon as the economy goes down any further, those gig economy folks who we believe and pretty much know are at below a 6th grade level, they're going to be in real trouble. And so that's why an economic study, putting the light on that, matters for the individual, mother, auntie, grandma, whoever is head of that household. If we believe in pulling people out of poverty, we have to pay attention to it from an economic issue, from an economic issue. And so that's why we put the spotlight kind of on that piece, if that makes sense. And so the hope, I'm coming to it. And I got
we have 5 minutes, so
I got
make sure
plenty
you
of time.
get to it.
I got plenty of time. I can do it in 30 seconds. The hope. This is a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is that we see everybody. Again, why the study? Because the study has helped us see people who are low literate, to know about the problem that needs to be on the hearts and minds of the American people. It's not. We know about climate change, we know about food insecurity, we know about housing insecurity. Where you're food insecure, you're housing insecure, you have poor health outcomes because you live in a low literate household. It is inextricably linked to solving all the problems that we want to solve, because we know it's correlated to your income and to family sustaining wages. So for us, hope was to say, this can't go on. Too many nonprofits are working in silos, doing their own thing, but we're not working together. So what we did about 1.5 years ago was we brought together about 200 experts around the entire United States, literacy experts, academia, philanthropy, corporate sector. Corporate sector has to be a part of solving this problem. It cannot just be us. The other reason why we did the economic study, corporate sector was not at the table at all. And believe it or not, nor is philanthropy. So it was our spark, if you will, our poke to bring them in. So the hope is we've now gathered this group. It's called the National Action Plan to Reduce Low Literacy in America in the next 5 years. Last fall, our current First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, launched this national initiative, which is now a thing. It's an entity, which is housed at the Barbara Bush Foundation, called All In. It is the Adult Learning Literacy Impact Network. And through that network, we seek over the next 5 years to reduce low literacy in America. Made up of all the national literacy organizations. Dollar General Literacy Foundation is a major partner, along with about 10 or 12 other Fortune 100 companies that are a part of that. And we couldn't have, I would say, had this hope if we weren't able to bring all those folks to the table. So looking at the problem from a national perspective, to solve it as a grass tops organization in service to grassroots organizations working on the ground, for example, here in Chicago, and bringing the national resources, funding, know-how, and even a national campaign will shed more light and awareness around the problem. So that's where we see hope.
Is there any place in the country that's actually making progress?
So we just started. It was just launched in October. We are going to do a place-based.
Like, what are the actual actionable things that people can do?
So the last panel just talked about place-based. We know place-based initiatives can be very successful. So that's the exact approach we're taking. So we're starting in a pilot in Charleston, South Carolina, in the Low Country, with all the major corporate partners, with the state, with the governors, with legislatures, with school districts, you name it. Everyone's at the table. We've created an ecosystem in the last 18 months. And so what are our best bets? Our best bets is to meet people where they are in the community that are low literate. That means where they live, play, pray, and work. So we're going to be working with workforce. We're going to be working with school banks, with food banks, churches, everywhere. We're also going to do a national campaign. And then
what do you do with this? Like, what do you actually do in church? What do they?
Tutoring, upskilling programs, credentialing, so that you can get a family-sustaining wages. So let me give you an example. Boeing works in Charleston, South Carolina. Amazon works in Charleston, South Carolina. Volvo works in Charleston, South Carolina. BMW. We just heard about the upskilling program here in Chicago. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So get low literate folks, help raise them up, credential them.
Like teach them how to read?
Digital literacy,
while they're at
teach
work?
them how teach them how to become digitally literate. People can't put their kids on Zoom, so we have a training curriculums just in digital literacy, so then they can actually do their job through digital literacy, health literacy, civic literacy, financial literacy, so they're able to be upskilled so they can actually compete and do those jobs and hopefully even have higher wages.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate sharing all this with the audience.
Thanks.
Thank you.